Welcome to the At the Bar podcast, powered by Hanson Reynolds. I'm Tim Hanson. With me, as always, is my partner, Toby Reynolds. Our special guest today, Frank Gimbel. Thanks for coming, Frank, especially in bad weather and even worse parking.
Well, I'm delighted to be here with two outstanding lawyers in the greater Milwaukee area and beyond. And if you don't like the weather, wait till tomorrow. It might be worse.
Exactly. Well, this kind of weather is why I can afford to live in Milwaukee.
I'm leaving on January 1st for 4 months. I got a place in Florida, so I'm lucky.
God bless. Well, I say we just kind of jump right in and get the Frank Gimbel story. Like right before we started rolling, you were telling us a story, and let's just pick up right from there. Let's get to it.
I'd be very happy to do that, and I'm delighted that the two of you thought that I had anything to say that would be interesting to people that are listening. I graduated from Marquette Law School in 1960. I transferred from the University of Wisconsin Law School, where I had started as a senior undergrad there. And during the summer between my graduation in 1958 from the University of Wisconsin School of Commerce and the fall of that year, I married my first wife, Barbara Posner, and she was the mother of my oldest sons, Todd, who is now 65, and Josh, who is 64. And we did not have a lot of money. I was a very mediocre student at Marquette Law School as a consequence of the fact that I did not come from a rich background, and I worked several jobs. That was one of the motivating factors for me deciding to go to Marquette rather than Wisconsin, because I had a lot of opportunities for jobs in Milwaukee. And while the tuition was like 3 times as high or 4 times as high as it was in Madison, I made up for it with working outside of the times when I was in the classroom. But that was, as a consequence of that kind of time restraints, I wasn't a great student. So I graduated, and the first job that I got was with a sole practitioner who had a kind of a office practice, and my pay was $150 a month, plus 50% of what I brought in. Now, in today's dollars, that's substantially more, but it was still very, very little for a person who was married with children. I had some side jobs. So in addition to practicing law with this man, I was doing sales of men's clothing at the Colony Shop in Whitefish Bay on Silver Spring.
Wow.
I was managing some real estate at the time for my father-in-law, whose name was Gene Posner, and I actually managed the building that I lived in with my wife, who was going to UWM. And then we quickly had 2 children, my oldest son, Todd, and my second son, Josh, and I was scrambling. One of the things that I at least envisioned might give me some visibility, if you will, at the time was to get involved in politics. And so in 1963, I filed nomination papers and ran for the state assembly. We were living in Fox Point on the corner of Santa Monica and Bradley Road across from the town club. And the incumbent was a man by the name of Niall Soik. Now, he won't mean anything to you because you're too young, but Niall Soik was a right-wing Republican, a graduate of West Point, and his job away from his job as a state legislator was at Allen Bradley Company. Needless to say, I didn't have high expectations of winning, but I did get involved in an awful lot of political activities in the company of, and this is relevant to my later life, John Reynolds, who was in that same election running for governor, Gaylord Nelson, who in that same election was running for U.S. Senator, Henry Royce, who was running for Congress in the same district, and who had been an incumbent because the district that he represented in U.S. Congress was a larger geographic footprint, and it included a lot of Milwaukee geography. But I got involved and I lost. And I did, as a consequence of being involved in the Democratic politics after I graduated from law school in 1960 and the time I ran for office, I did work with 3 other guys, and we took the Milwaukee Democratic Party from being in the red to being in the black. And we did it by having fundraising events at reasonable prices, and we tried to get a lot of participation, which we did, and we succeeded. The outgrowth of that is kind of the beginning of the Frank Gimbel story of how I'm sitting here at this table today with 2 distinguished lawyers, the 2 of you, and somebody who has had some level of notoriety and success in the law business. And that is that I was invited by the then chairman of the Milwaukee or State Democratic Party. His name was Patrick Lucy, and he was a Madison real estate guy. And we met at the then Schrader Hotel, now the Hilton, for lunch. And he said to me, I've invited you to lunch with a very specific purpose in mind. And the very specific purpose in mind is that those of us who are involved in Democratic politics in the state of Wisconsin, are very impressed with what you and your colleagues did with respect to taking the Milwaukee Democratic Party from being in the red into the black. And as a kind of reward, and I think it's also something that we will be able to use effectively, we want you to be the chairman of the Jefferson-Jackson Day dinner in 1963. And the speaker at that dinner will be Lyndon Johnson, the Vice President of the United States.
Wow.
And you will be the MC of the program. I said, well, you know, Pat, I said, it is an extraordinary offer. I'm scrambling to make my mortgage payments. If you could get me a job with a fixed income that would be family sustaining, I'll do anything for you except commit a crime. And he said, well, what kind of a job are you looking for? I said, well, I heard that there's an opening in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Milwaukee. And if I could get that job, Pat, I said, you'd have a slave for life. He called over the maitre d' at the restaurant in the Schrader in the lobby, and he said, do you have a phone that I can use? This was way before cell phones. And the maitre d' brought a phone over, and Pat Lucy got on the phone, and he dialed a number, and the conversation that I eavesdropped on, because I was sitting as close to him as I'm sitting to you here at this table, was, hey, Bobby, how are you? Great. How's Jack? Listen, I'm calling you for a very specific purpose. I'm having lunch with this brilliant young lawyer who's done extraordinary stuff for us. And he has asked me if I had the ability to influence him being able to get a job in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Milwaukee. That's the purpose of my call. Silence. Really? Oh, that's spectacular. What should he do? Oh, terrific. Yeah, say hi to Jack. Goodbye. Needless to say, who was he talking to? Do you know?
No.
Bobby Kennedy.
Oh, my God.
Who was Jack? John F. Kennedy. Why did he have that kind of a relationship with the Attorney General of the United States that he just pulled out of his pocket at this luncheon? Because in 1960, neither one of you were born, but in 1960, there was a primary election in the state of Wisconsin for President of the United States between John F. Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey. Now, you may not remember who Hubert Humphrey is. He was the United States Senator from Minnesota. He was like the third senator from the state of Wisconsin. And John F. Kennedy blew him out of the water. And Pat Lucy became, at that time, he became like an instrument in the eyes of the Kennedys of their success. Mm. And what he told him in that telephone conversation was, tomorrow morning, you have him call Jim Brennan, the U.S. Attorney. Mm. I will call him now, and he will have the job. Jeez. And the next day, I called Jim Brennan, and I knew who Jim Brennan was. He was a state senator from the west side of Milwaukee. He was a very famous football family at Notre Dame, and you won't even remember this. His brother, Terry Brennan, was an All-American running back, and at a point in time, after he graduated from college and down the road, he became the coach of the Notre Dame football team. And they say Jim Brennan was a better player than Terry, but he had a short career because he interrupted his college career to go to the war effort. But not, in any event, the next day I called, and the die was cast, and he said, when do you want to start? And I said, well, I've made a commitment to this JJ dinner, which is going to be in July. I said, I'll start in August or September, if that works for you. We picked a date, and we done it.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And now the footnote to that story, at least a footnote. I mean, there's an encyclopedia of footnotes.
Yeah.
But a footnote to that story is that on the day of the JJ dinner, which was, by the way, a dinner which was the main fundraiser for the state Democrats, the ticket price was $100. Now, today that would be about $1,000. And they sold like 350 tickets, and it was at the arena. And I was invited to be a part of the entourage for the day. And so I met Pat Lucey and two other people, and we went in a limousine to General Mitchell Field, and we drove the limousine onto the tarmac, and when the vice president's plane landed, and Lyndon Johnson and his small entourage came out and got in the limousine, I met the Vice President of the United States. And we traveled together to the Schrader Hotel, where I had made my deal with Pat Lucey, and we went to a luncheon. And when I say we were there, I was a fly on the wall, all of this. I mean, I had no real identity. But I was at the front door of getting an identity from the years that followed these little events that occurred. So we went in this room, and in this room there were about a dozen very, very high-end executives from the major corporations in the city of Milwaukee, and they were hosting the Vice President of the United States. And so we sat around a table, and I have to say that I don't even think I was at the table. I was against the wall some distance away. And Lyndon Johnson was an extraordinary street politician. So we're sitting around this table, and when I say this table, there were many tables put together, but it was in the shape of tables looking at each other, and on the end, and he was on the head of that grouping, and he said, I've been to Milwaukee very often, and I don't know much about your town, but everything I hear about it is pretty darn good. What I'd like to do right now, if that's okay with you, because I may be stepping into your privacy a little bit, I'd like each one of you to introduce yourself and just tell me what you do for a living. So he goes to the first guy and he says, what's your name? Well, Mr. Vice President, my name is Joseph Eline. I am the president of the Schlitz Brewing Company in Milwaukee. Oh, Schlitz Brewing Company. I had me some of that Schlitz beer. That's good beer. Let me ask you gentlemen here, how many of you, and you raise your hand, if your answer is yes, in the last year bought 2 cases of Schlitz beer? How many cases went up? I'm looking at the two of you, and you have no clue. And you could say, I don't know, and that's okay. And if you say none, you'd be right.
Ooh, whoops.
None. Now, Lyndon Johnson was a very extemporaneous guy. And he said, well, he says, I'm kind of not surprised by your answer. he said, but let me, Mr. Uihlein, if you don't mind, let me tell you that if I would have invited the people to this lunch and they be supporters of mine, every hand in the room would have gone up. And what does that tell you? It tells you that you're on the wrong side in politics here in terms of your commerce. He may not have used the word commerce. That's my word.
Yeah.
In terms of your income, in terms of your business opportunities. And he did that all around the table. And these were the president of Allis-Chalmers, the president of all of the major manufacturing company, all people that belong to the Milwaukee Country Club, which is a very pure Protestant, white, Anglo-Saxon group of human beings. And I said to many people, and I'll say here to the folks who are taking a few minutes to listen to us, that I would be shocked and surprised if they had an election for president, that he wouldn't have got half the people to vote for him because he was that charming.
Wow.
Now we move on to the dinner, and I'm the MC.
And you're like 27 at this time?
I am 27 years old. And we go around, and I'm introducing all the speakers. He's going to be a little tardy. So we start the program at about 8:15. He's going to arrive there at 9 o'clock. And in my mind, I'm figuring out how long does it take me to go through the table and speeches. And I've kind of prompted the people, here's how much time you got, and don't screw around. Use that time. Don't go over. And we're moving right along, and I've introduced the governor of the state of Wisconsin. I've introduced two United States senators, Gaylord Nelson and Bill Proxmire. I've introduced congressmen, the mayor of the city of Milwaukee, all Democrats, good, solid Democrats. And a guy walks in at about 10 minutes to 9, and he says, Frank Gimbel here? And they point me up there, and this guy comes up to me and says, Mr. Gimbel, he says, my name is Joe Blow. I'm the Secret Service, a person assigned to the vice president, and he asked me to let you know he's running a little late. So he's not likely going to be here till about 9:15. Now, I've got my whole program is organized for a 9 o'clock, dum, dum, da-dum, and they're going to play, the band is going to play, and he's going to walk in, and then I'm going to say, here we are, Vice President of the United States, so we got a little program for introducing him. Well, now I got 20 minutes to kill. And I said to myself, I was street smart, okay? I didn't come from a fancy neighborhood. Neither one of my parents went to college. I got to frickin' kill this time. Because if we have a timeout, these people are going home. Yeah. So I did. So I started a cross conversation with some of the people on the podium. And lo and behold, you know, we carried on, and at about 3:15, two Secret Service guys come in. Here comes the vice president. They got the bandits playing, and that's when we had the dinner.
Wow. So I have two questions that come out of that whole thing. One is, so was Pat Lucey that close to the Kennedys generally, and did that did that last over that entire?
Yes, it did.
Couple decades?
It did.
Okay.
And he was.
I mean, we worked with Paul obviously at Michael Best, and I never realized that there was quite that association between the Kennedys and Pat Lucey.
Well, and Pat Lucey became, as you know, the governor of the state of Wisconsin shortly thereafter, and he became the ambassador to Mexico during his second term as governor, and that was a Lyndon Johnson appointment. Mm-hmm. So yes, he was He was chairman of the Democratic Party of the state of Wisconsin in 1960, and he, as a consequence of his Irish Catholic background, had, at least in my eyes, and I think the eyes of anybody who has a street sense of politics, he was a very logical candidate for the Kennedys to have to knock on a door and say, "Will you front us?"
Yeah, and
he did it, and he opened himself up to a lifelong familial relationship with the Kennedy family.
And the second thing is that's a fascinating story you have. Do you believe that same dynamic exists in national politics that exists even in Wisconsin or even local Milwaukee politics, that if you were that same 25-year-old going into that path today, you could navigate that in the same way, or is it a whole different world?
The answer is a qualified no.
Yeah.
And it's qualified by the fact that I ain't on the street with them anymore, okay? So I can't speak from personal experiences with the current people who run the Democratic Party in the state of Wisconsin. What I see of the incumbent chairperson is that he's a very slick guy. And I think that the Democrats in the state of Wisconsin are about as well organized as a voluntary political party can be. And when they have the governor, it gives them an edge to getting doors open.
Yeah.
But to the relationship between then and now, I cannot say that there is the involvement of people of influence today as there was then.
Okay, yeah, because that really answers it. Because I mean, you went from 0 to 60 in a matter of a lunch almost, right?
I did,
and
unquestionably, in my opinion. But for that lunch, I'd just be a name in a phone book in small print.
Yeah, or is it the cult of personality that is the force of nature of Frank Gimbel that one way or the other it was going to happen?
Well, I can't say.
Yeah.
I can only say that it was a huge leap for me to have an opportunity to be a lawyer. And at the end of the day, the U.S. Attorney's experience for me turned out to be a place where, first and foremost, I learned how to be a lawyer. And second, of most significance, at least from a retrospective point of view, is that I had cases that people like my children, who I've got 4 children, 3 of them are lawyers, and one's married to a lawyer, so we got a lot of lawyers in the family, just wouldn't have had and didn't have the experience to get into driving seats. I've got a son in D.C. who graduated magna cum laude and editor-in-chief of the Law Journal from Georgetown Law School. He was an honor student, a straight-A student. He works in a big law firm. He's never been run a trial by himself.
Yeah, right.
He's a great writer and he's a great speaker and he does well in his firm, but he's a number out of 500 or 1,000 lawyers. They got 10 offices around the world.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, unquestionably in my mind, the quirk of circumstances that got me essentially to be a fellow that this very powerful Democrat, Pat Lucey, found to be both interesting, informative, a good bullshitter, and somebody who had potential for politics.
Yeah. Well, and you said that you made a conscious decision that you thought politics might be of utility to you as you were trying to figure out how to get a footing when you first moved to Fox Point. Did you already have great interest in politics, or did you kind of make the conscious decision that just that was a good entree?
I had an interest in politics.
Okay.
I was involved in school politics. I ran for offices. I was the president of this class and that class.
Okay.
I mean, one curious footnote to the career of Frank Gimbel is that I went to Whitefish Bay High School. The Whitefish Bay High School had a senior class play every year. The year that I was a senior, the play was Anne Rand's play called The Night of January 16th. I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
It's a courtroom drama, and it's a murder case, and there's a prosecutor and a defense lawyer. The prosecutor in the play was Frank Gimbel. The defense lawyer in the case was Bob Habish. He turned out to be a pretty good lawyer, too. And we had 3 trials in front of a jury that came from the audience. He won 2 of them and said he threw the one that I won. But that's consistent with Bob Habish.
Do you tell the story that you won 2 and threw the one that Bob Habish won?
I don't.
Or do you have the same
I give
story?
him credit for that. I said, he's correct. He did throw the case because I'm not going to win an argument with Bob Habush on an ego basis. No disrespect intended.
Yeah, right.
I'm sure none taken. So how long were you at the U.S. Attorney's Office?
I was there for 5 years. And the reason that I was there for 5 years, I had set in my mind 3 years. As I was trying cases, and I was trying a jury case a month, and I'm moving up the ladder, I was assigned, and I think I was assigned because I got down on my knees and begged for the opportunity to be the prosecutor in a case called the United States of America versus Frank Balistreri. And it was a tax evasion case where Frank Balistreri, who was ostensibly the head of the mafia in Milwaukee, had been indicted for income tax evasion for 2 years in the late 1950s. And the case had gone through multiple layers of pretrial challenges directed primarily by Balistreri's number one lawyer, who was a guy by the name of Maurice Walsh from Chicago. Maurice Walsh was a person whose background included 10 years as an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago, and he was the head of the Chicago office of the U.S. Attorney's trial team. So he was a very polished, very knowledgeable guy. His second chair was a guy from Milwaukee named Jim Shello, who himself was very sharp, very smart, not as warm and fuzzy when warm and fuzzy was required, but they had thrown every motion that existed in the books, and many of the motions prior to the time that I even got in is what caused the couple-year delay in the prosecution of Balistreri, because the IRS were kind of break through the door philosophy, and they didn't always dot their I's and cross their T's when they got judicial authority for searches. And a lot of the case went south. But I took the case, and they had brought a motion to suppress, and the motion for change of venue, and the motion for change of venue was granted, and the case was transferred to the Southern District of Illinois. And so I was driving down to Springfield, Illinois, to start the trial against Frank Balistreri on a Friday afternoon. And this is a very, very interesting part of the Frank Gimbel story of life, or success as a lawyer. I'm in a restaurant in Peoria, and if you ask me what was the name of the restaurant, I can't tell you today. I couldn't tell you that day. I couldn't tell you the next day because I didn't know what it was. I didn't know I was going to be there. And this comes into my story. I'm sitting at the table with a guy by the name of Charles Siragusa, who is the commissioner against organized crime in the city of Chicago, Richard Eagleton, who is the U.S. attorney for the Southern District of Illinois, and Jim Brennan, who's my boss, who's driving down to watch opening day of the Monday jury trial. And we're sitting at a table in this restaurant, and it's a restaurant on a Friday night that's got no tables empty. And the maitre d' comes to the table, and he says, "Pardon me, gentlemen," he says, "is there Frank Gimbel at this table?" I said, "Yeah, I'm Frank Gimbel. I have a phone call for you." I said to myself, what the fuck? I mean, can we use that word on here?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Who could possibly know I'm in this restaurant? I couldn't tell you where I'm at. And I went to the phone, and I picked it up, and I said, "Frank Gimbel. Frank, this is Mitch Rogovin. You don't know me. I know you're having dinner there, and I am the Assistant Attorney General of the United States. And I've just come from a meeting with the Attorney General, Ramsey Clark. And I'm afraid that the purpose for my call is that you are going to have to move for a continuance of the Balistreri case on Monday morning." I said, "Mitch, you're not serious." "Yes, I'm serious." "Why would I do that? This case has been scheduled for 6 months. Judge Poos and I are good pals. I'm going to get up there on Monday morning and I'm going to say, 'Your Honor, we need an adjournment of this case.' And he's going to say, 'What's the basis?' And I say, 'I don't know,' or I don't know." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to come and see you tomorrow. I'm going to call you tomorrow. We'll see if we can move down the road from that. But right now, you're instructed to ask for an adjournment on Monday morning. So I go from the phone call to the table, and they say, "Who was it?" I said, "You won't believe this story." And I tell them the story, and I pass out, literally. Mm-hmm. I'm on the ground. Next thing I know, I got the fire department has got a face mask on me. And they said, "Mr. Gimbel, we're going to have to take you to the hospital." I said, "You're not taking me to the hospital." "Well, we have to, or you have to sign a release." I said, "I'll sign a release. Give me the release." And sign the release. I said, "You'll drive me to Springfield." I explained to the people at the table what had just happened, and they were dumbfounded. And everybody in the restaurant's looking at us because here's this young stud laying on the floor, and they're figuring, what's going on here? Well, to move the story along, I go to Springfield at 10 o'clock in the morning. Mitch Rogovan calls. He says, I'm coming out there. I'm bringing another lawyer along, and here's why. Yesterday, Friday, Mr. Balistreri was taking some paneling down from his office on Downer Avenue, and he found a microphone. And he has the microphone. And the Attorney General and I and other relevant people were trying to figure out, what are we going to do about this? Because it's our microphone. But it's not your microphone. It's not the IRS's microphone. And the IRS knows nothing about this wiretap and has got no information from it. So you're going to advise the court on Monday morning about this illegal FBI wiretap, and you're going to request that the court start the proceedings as a motion to suppress hearing. Now, by this time, I had tried, I'm going to say, 15 cases, maybe more, okay? And I'm a self-confident fellow to begin with. And so I said, okay, we'll see what happens. And lo and behold, on Monday morning, the first thing I do, I go into the courtroom, and here on the wall, the defense side, is Maury Walsh, Jim Shallow, two other schmagaggy lawyers from Milwaukee. I couldn't tell their names. They just carried the briefcases, and Frank Balistreri. And if you'd see Frank Balistreri, he was about 5'7" tall, immaculately dressed. He had handmade suits in those days. It was part of my net worth prosecution of him that he paid like $600 or $700 for. When you could walk into the best clothing store in Milwaukee, McNeil and Moore, which is a Milwaukee clothing store, the Pfister Hotel, and you could buy a fabulous suit for $350, okay? And if you were just a guy working as a stiff in a law office, you could go in and buy a reasonable suit for $89. But the point of my story is that there's a package on their table. I tell the bailiff, you got to get the jurors out of here. He says, I got to talk to the judge. He goes in, comes out. He says, okay. And he said, why? And I said, well, there's a matter I got to bring up before the court before we start picking the jury. And so he shoos out this multi-hundred people. And the judge comes out, and he says, we're here, United States of America versus Frank Balistreri. Appearances, please. I get up. My name is Franklin M. Gimbel. I'm Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. I have next to me Charles McNellis. He's a special counsel with the Criminal Tax Division of the United States Department of Justice, second chairing me. And then Maury Walsh introduced himself. So before we start, Your Honor, with voir dire, I have to make a disclosure. Okay, what's your disclosure? I said, it was brought to my attention over the weekend that Mr. Balistreri recovered a microphone from one of his offices in Milwaukee, and I am disclosing that instrument was installed by the FBI in Milwaukee for intelligence about organized crime in Milwaukee involving Mr. Balistreri. And Balistreri's looking at me now like he's trying to measure me. How big is the box going to be that I'm going to be planted in? And Walsh knows goddamn well that he's got an FBI wiretap, but he didn't have an ability to sell. He just could show he had a microphone. And I said, nonetheless, I'm assuring the court that this case has not been infected by any information that was collected by this illegal means, and I am urging the court to consider that instead of picking a jury in this case or dismissing the case, which I suspect the defense will be seeking, that we start out with a motion to suppress hearing. Mr. Walsh, what do you have to say? And Walsh gets up, and he's built a little bit like you, Tim. He's solid.
Big, strong guy. Sexy.
Solid, big, strong, sexy guy. The sexy part I would keep aside. But you're sexy, but the big, strong guy is. And he comes up and he makes a fist and he puts it within a half of an inch of my nose. This lawyer, he's just referring to me, has the audacity to suggest that there is anything that this court can do other than to dismiss the case with prejudice forthwith and demand and cause an obligation on the federal government to pay all of Mr. Ballesteri's legal expenses. This is the worst case of government misconduct that I have ever seen or known about. And he says, Mr. Gimbel, and I told him that a person like Mr. Ballesteri has generated a lot of interest by law enforcement agencies. I said, I'm not going to get into that because it's not relevant to your decision here. I'm only saying that the FBI and the IRS and other parts of the federal government may have globally the same kinds of objectives, but they don't share with each other what they do. And I said, the FBI in particular under Mr. Hoover doesn't share with anybody. He takes from everybody and gives back to nobody. And so I'm going to take a 5-minute recess. He walks off, and he comes back in 5 minutes. He says, I'm satisfied that Mr. Gimbel's representation about his unawareness of any information that came from this source is a part of this case, and I'm going to give him an opportunity to show that by starting the case as a motion to suppress hearing. When do you want to do that, Mr. Gimbel? Today. Well, now it's about 11 o'clock. How about 1 o'clock? 1 o'clock we'll start. How long did the motion to suppress hearing go? Take a guess.
7.5 minutes.
Okay.
7 days.
4 weeks. I called every single IRS agent that worked the case. I called 12 or 15 FBI guys who worked the wiretap. And the end game was there was no communication between the two agencies. And the guy who was in charge of the wiretap was an FBI agent by the name of Warren Dunn. Now, that name may or may not be something you know. But Warren Dunn was this 6'3" Irish Catholic crew cut guy, the perfect example of an FBI agent. Graduated from Creighton Law School, and he took a course for over a year in Sicilian Italian. He ran the wiretap. Mm-hmm. Now, another footnote in the story of Frank Gimbel, and the biggest case of my career, at least the one that gave me some identity in the legal profession.
Well, so far anyway.
is that Warren Dunn comes to see me after we convict Ballesteri, after like a 3-month trial with a 1-month interruption because Maury Walsh had a heart attack. And we took a break in the jury trial for him to recover.
Jeez.
And came to see me and said, I have a chance to go to work for Miller Brewing Company as assistant general counsel when it was owned by the company that ran the Greyhound bus. And I says, call him from here and take the job. And he did. And he became the president of Miller Brewing Company.
Wow.
And that has some relevance in the Gimbel family because one of my sons didn't like practicing law and he went to work for Miller Brewing Company, had a career there. And Warren took care of me and I did a lot of work for them, trouble stuff, only with trouble when the kids of the executives and the executives got in jackpots and what have you. But in any event, to move the story ahead, we had this motion to suppress hearing. The judge severed one count. We had 2 substantive tax evasion counts and 1 account of behaving in a way to sidestep his obligations to pay taxes, and he was afraid that that's too gray. And I tried the case, in the middle of which, as I said, one morning a guy shows up, and it ain't Maury Walsh, and it's a lawyer from Chicago, and he says, We need an adjournment. Mr. Walsh is in the hospital with a heart attack, but he's going to recover. We need a 3-week adjournment. Mr. Gimbel, what's your position? I oppose it. Jim Shello is one of the top criminal lawyers in the country. He can try the case. And the guy who he sends, who became a federal judge in Chicago, says, Mr. Balistreri has not shared with Mr. Shello many of the things that are relevant to this case, only with Mr. Walsh. So the judge says, all right, I'm giving you a 3-week adjournment, which it became a 4-week adjournment. And that was in the middle of the substantive case.
Jeez.
And we tried the case and finished it. It was a great learning experience for me.
Same jury came back 4 weeks later?
Yeah. And what happened was curious. I mean, in a trial lawyer's experience, there's always kinds of interesting adventures. We started with 16 jurors. We were down to 13. And the day that we reconvene after Walsh comes back to court, one of the jurors says, Judge, I'm going to need to be off tomorrow because I got to pick up some farm implement equipment and I can't be here. And if he had gone, we'd have been down to 12. And so the judge says, Mr. Gimbel, what's your position about this? I says, well, my position is that I don't want to agree to have this case with 12 jurors in the box unless Mr. Walsh is willing to stipulate to a decision by less than a 12-person jury. He says, fuck you. No way. And so we took the day off so the guy could get his farm implement equipment. And we finished the trial, and, you know, it got to be pushy-shovey, and it was tense. And, you know, just a side story.
So wait, what was the ultimate conviction on that?
He was convicted of tax evasion in 2 counts.
What was
He's sentenced to 2 years in prison.
Sentenced to 2 years?
And I went to the Court of Appeals in the Seventh Circuit twice. I went to the United States Supreme Court, and I went back to the trial court after I left the government. And it held up.
Was that his longest conviction?
No.
Okay.
No. He was thereafter charged with a bunch of stuff related to mob relationships, and then they had legal wiretaps. And that's what got him. Yeah. And that's why the mafia is kind of out of business today, because the government can and does wiretap everybody.
Yeah.
And everybody should go. So I got the conviction, and the closing argument was interesting because, and I don't know what detail you want because there's a lot of other stories, and we don't have that much time, but just curiously, I bought a puzzle, and I had the puzzle on my desk, and I got it in front of the jury, and I talked about the net worth case and what this all means, and then I picked up opened up the puzzle. I took up pieces. If I held this up, I held each of these, you wouldn't have any idea what picture we did. But if I put them all together and we make the thing, I close the box, and I pick it up, it's Abe Lincoln. I don't know if you've ever been to Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah.
You can't go one block without seeing Abe Lincoln's face. And so I told him that the summary witness was the whole story. And Maury Walsh gets up, and he walks over to my table, and he picks up the box, and he opens it up, and he takes 2 fists, he pulls out the pieces, and he throws one handful of pieces this way and one handful of pieces that way, puts the cover back on the box. Mr. Gimbel, or Mr. Prosecutor, he never called me Gimbel, never once. Put the puzzle together now. He can't. Maybe he can, but there's going to be a lot of holes in it, just like his case. It was terrific. It was terrific.
Awesome.
It was terrific. So I get up in my rebuttal, and I say, you know, I said, I really shouldn't say this, but I was very excited about coming down here and trying this case for one reason. Maury Walsh has a reputation of being one of the great trial lawyers in the United States. I said, I'm going to be in the courtroom with him, and I'm going to be able to watch him up close. I says, and I believed that until his closing argument. I says, if I have learned, you got the facts, you argue the facts. You got the law, you argue the law. If you don't have the facts, you don't have the law, you talk about what a jerk the prosecutor is, and you do tricks like throwing puzzle pieces around. I still trust my expert witness. I still trust this. If you think the pieces are missing, find them not guilty. But if you agree with my expert that all the pieces are there, and they are the same ones that I showed you in the box, come back with a conviction. And they did.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic.
But it was a great education.
Yeah.
So that was the end of the
Who worked on that with you?
Charlie McNellis was a special attorney with the Justice Department Criminal Tax. And he was with me for the whole trial, and he was with me for the pretrial motions. And the lead investigator from IRS Criminal Intelligence, a guy named Ed Schwalbach, he sat at the counsel table. So that was the team at the counsel table. And he handled some witnesses, McNellis did. And he was there primarily because of the size of the case and because of my relative youth and inexperience, comparative for that size case.
But, yeah, how in the earth did you wrangle that case out of the
Well,
hands
when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we had 4 and 5 assistant U.S. attorneys. Today they have, 40. They have the same number of cases, 250 cases. So we tried cases.
Yeah.
And you tried on the run. And J. Edgar Hoover, there's a million stories about J. Edgar Hoover, and I could tell you a couple of them. I'll tell you one quick story about J. Edgar Hoover that is very curious. J. Edgar Hoover was a person that took credit for being the best buy in town, the FBI. And how he did that, at least in part, was that he had what he called at the end of every year the successes of the FBI in fines, savings, and recoveries. Remember those 3 words. So what he did, for example, we have a naval base, Great Lakes, where young kids would be in the Navy in Chicago area. And on a weekly basis, some guy got sad for his girlfriend. He'd snatch a car and he'd drive it to Wisconsin to see his girlfriend, okay? He prosecuted these cases called the Dyer Act cases. He prosecuted 25 of those a year. We did, okay? And he took the value of the car as a recovery. So he added up all those kinds of things, every fine in every case. And then what he did is he frequently would find how much people paid for their lawyers, and he'd say that was stuff that he had generated as dollars in the pocket of the federal government. And he was a good salesman for that effect. But the J. Edgar Hoover story that I have for you that is one of the curious Frank Gimbel adventures. 2 guys are in a filling station.
What's the M, by the way? You say FMG. What does M stand for?
Melroy. Never heard that one before.
No, that's why I was curious.
Melroye. My mother must have been taking drugs.
Yeah.
I've never heard the name before. So
anyway,
in any event, there's 2 guys in the filling station in New Berlin. And the guy drives in there with a car, and he's getting gas, and he's got a foreign accent. And they get into a conversation, and the gas attendant say, this car is filthy and the oil is dirty. We should really change the oil. So the guy says, yeah, go ahead, change the oil. And so they change the oil, and they open up the trunk, and there's rifles and pistols in the trunk of the car. And he say, what are all these guns in here? And the guys say that he, the person in the car, answered, I'm with the FBI, and I just come from one investigation of a kidnapping in Texas, and I'm going to the Frank Sinatra Jr. investigation. So they finished the deal up, and they don't like the sound of this thing. So they called a New Berlin Police Department. The New Berlin Police Department comes and takes a statement, and the New Berlin Police Department calls the FBI in Milwaukee, and it says there's a guy in a Cadillac with a foreign accent who claimed he was at the FBI. So they go and they interview the 2 jamokes in the filling station, and the FBI agent comes to my office, and he says, we'd like you to prosecute this guy for impersonating an FBI man. So I look at the case, I listen to the case. Nah, I decline. It's a skinny case. These 2 guys, ridiculous. And then they leave. Within 24 hours, I get a call from the assistant director of the FBI, Mr. Gimbel. I'm calling for J. Edgar Hoover. Mr. Hoover is aware that you declined to prosecute this man, Peter Hurkos, for impersonating an FBI agent. And he, Mr. Hoover, is of the view that Mr. Hurkos sabotages the reputation of the FBI in many places. He's nothing but a 2-bit entertainer who claims that he can solve crimes with his extrasensory perception. So we'd like you to reconsider. I said, okay, I'll prosecute the guy. I got a freaking call from J. Edgar Hoover. Here I am, 26 or 27-year-old guy, and J. Edgar Hoover wants me to prosecute the case. And so I did. So he gets arrested, and he comes in, and I prosecute him. We got a jury trial, and there's one of the lawyers is a guy named W. Rothstein. He was a great criminal lawyer in Milwaukee, trial lawyer. I don't know if you ever knew him. It was before your time. And he was a good friend of my mother and father. And my dad would come to court sometimes when I was trying cases. So I'm trying her cause. And he gets up on the stand and he talks about the fact that he's considered to be great assistance to law enforcement all over the United States. And he goes to his wallet and he's got honorary member, a detective of the Nashville, Miami, Los Angeles police departments. And so the argument that they make is that he didn't say that I was with the FBI. He said, I work on cases that the FBI does too. I am an investigator, okay? In any event, they put some character witnesses on the stand. Now, I call a woman as a character witness. What is your name? My name is Wanda van der Herk. What do you do? I am a mother. Do you know the defendant in this case, Peter Herkos? I do. How do you know him? I was married to him. How long were you married to him? 15 years. Did he ever misrepresent himself that you ever were aware of? I don't know, but I would say that it certainly is possible. What about his character? Does he have a reputation for honesty in the people that you know and the people that he knows generally? He does. What is his reputation? He is a liar. He couldn't tell the truth if it helped him. No more questions. Rothstein gets up. Mrs. van der Herk, you hate this man, don't you? That is not true. Well, you don't like him, do you? That is not true. Are you telling this court that you still love this man? Now tears come down from her eyes, and she turns to see the federal judge. Judge Kenneth Grube was a very serious man. Your Honor, must I answer that question? No, you don't have to ask that question. Move on to your next one. All right, Mrs. van der Herk, I want you to tell me the names of those people that you talk to that have told you that your ex-husband is a liar. Well, there was Mr. and Mrs. Sidney Polachek. Where do they live? 1922 South blah, blah, blah Street. She went through 15 names, which I had prepped her for. And the jury now, these women, are looking at her, and they're looking at him, and they want to fucking hit him on the head, okay? Cases in the jury. It's publicized, but they don't have TV cameras in the federal court. But they got journalists all over the place. And they go up to Herkos, who's a performer. Well, Mr. Herkos, you're a clairvoyant. You know everything's going to happen. What's going to happen with this case? He says, the jury will be back in 10 minutes. I will be found not guilty. Okay, fine and dandy. Go out in the hallway. My father's watching this case. And he comes up to me and he says, you go and you apologize to Mr. Rothstein. I says, what do you mean? Well, you were insulting him in your closing argument. Now, W. Rothstein comes over. He says, nice job, Frank. You did a great job. And my dad says, I'm so sorry. The kid cut him some slack because he doesn't know better. He's insulting. He said, he did perfect. I would have done exactly the same thing if I was out on the other side. That's what we do. I had no disrespect for it. If what I said offended you, I apologize for that. I went through it. Yeah. Well, 5 minutes later, jury's back. Boom, they found him guilty.
Well, he was half right.
Yeah. It was a little longer than he thought. But they found him guilty, and the sentence was probation, and he had to surrender all of his honorary police badges. That was part of the sentence from Judge Grube. I recently did a check on him. I did a computer check on Peter Hurkos. Right after that trial, within I would say 6 months, he's out there selling himself as clairvoyant, solving crimes, and doing everything else. Never changed.
Was he a bit of a character around?
Oh, definitely a character. He had this shtick. He said he was a painter. He fell off his lead and became clairvoyant.
Yeah.
And this country is a place they love bullshit stories like that.
But that was your only interaction with him, huh?
That was my only interaction with him. Yeah. And I wouldn't even brought the case if J. Edgar Hoover had. Now, I got a personal letter from J. Edgar Hoover.
As a result of that conviction?
Dear Mr. Gimbel, my colleagues and I want to tell you what an extraordinary job you did, blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
And he signed it J. Edgar Hoover. And it was real ink.
Wow.
And I got a letter from Lyndon Johnson, a personal letter. And when I got divorced from my first wife, I lost those letters somewhere in the switch. So those would have been nice things to have to pass on to your kids. So
Absolutely.
That would really be
They
cool.
were really personal letters.
Man.
Where did you grow up in Milwaukee?
I grew up, started out on the west side. Lived in a $40 a month lower flat on 40th an hour. I went to Townsend Street School till the 6th grade. And that was, I was born in 1936. So this is in the early 40s. And that was the time of World War II. And the neighborhood that I lived in was a blue-collar neighborhood. There were a lot of people that were sympathetic to Hitler. And I had many fights, where I was called a dirty Jew and what have you, and fist fights. And I'd come home, I'd be bloodied up, or the other guy would be bloodied up. And it just was part of it. Then we moved in 6th grade to Whitefish Bay. And so I went to Whitefish Bay Richards School and Whitefish Bay High School and graduated from Whitefish Bay High School. And that's how Habush and I got together.
Crazy. Well,
was good.
I know we have some a little bit of a time constraint, but I think you should talk a little bit about the project that you're working on that you mentioned before we started.
Oh, yeah. Well, I am doing a book, and I have a writer, and the writer is a retired Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reporter who, during the course of his service to the Journal-Sentinel, did cover courtrooms. And so he watched a lot of different trials and techniques and things of that nature. And the book is essentially the stories of my career and a little side stories of some of the community service stuff I've been involved with. I was involved as chairman of the Wisconsin Center District, so I was involved substantially in construction of what is now the Baird Center, but it was the Midwest Airline Center, and I sold the naming rights to that. And I was involved as chairman of the board during the construction of the Milwaukee Theater. It's now the Miller Holiday Theater, and in the reconstruction of the what is the UWM athletic place where they play their basketball games. I took a lot of heat for a bunch of that stuff because they said I was wasting money and that we didn't need it. But I feel proud of the fact that I was involved in that. I was the president of Downtown Milwaukee Rotary Club. So I've always had this kind of, if you will, division of time between community service and the courtroom. And they work well together. And I've loved trying cases. I haven't tried any juries for the last 4 or 5 years, but I say that I've tried over 150 jury trials. Wow. And I had some curious and wonderful defense case. I represented a lady named Sally Papilla, who had a very famous restaurant, Sally's, in the Knickerbocker Hotel. On the first trial we had, there were 10. It was like a mafia trial. I mean, all the Italians were the defendants. And we had a battery of great lawyers. So I represented Sally. My partner, Richard Riley, represented a guy named Jimmy Gennaro. Curiously, Joe Balistreri, who was Frank Balistreri's son, represented a guy named Joe Bazile. Jerry Boyle represented a guy named Russ Ania. Dave Cannon, who was your partner, represented a defendant, Max Adonis. Pat Doherty, they were both classmates of mine, by the way, at Marquette Law School, Thomas Doherty and David Cannon. David and I became very close friends during our law school days. We took the green bus to school every day together, so we became very close friends. And they were all in this trial, and the trial was a sequestered jury. And at the end of the day, everybody was found guilty, except Sally was not found guilty of conspiring to burn down a guy's restaurant, which was done by a street thug that was hired. And he turned as a government witness. And so Sally wound up getting a sentence of like 2 months in work release jail. And then a second trial I had where I defended Sally, and it was having a fix, not getting in the having to join the union, but the U.S. attorney in that case threatened if she gets on the witness stand. They didn't want her on the witness stand. She was just a charismatic, spectacular communicator. If you put her up there, we're gonna disclose in our cross-examination of her that she was a snitch against the mafia. And she said, "Well, I wasn't," but I said, "Well, I'm gonna make a motion in limine, but I don't trust this judge." It was Judge. It was a federal judge. I'm drawing out a blank on his name, but you'll know who he is. He's passed away, but he was a very strict guy, straight guy. So she didn't get on a stand. She
Curran?
got
Curran?
It was Curran, Judge Curran. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yep.
Yeah, we tried.
And he and I were friends
Yeah,
because we were
good
fellows of
guy,
the
yeah.
American College of Trial Lawyers together. But he had my brother's case. My brother was prosecuted for being stung by an undercover IRS agent. And he was tried, and he was convicted, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison by Curran. And I argued, well, I didn't argue it, but we hired a lawyer who got the case reversed in the Seventh Circuit, but it killed my brother at a young age because he had a lot of anxiety. And the day that, the year that my mother died, curiously, my brother's case was reversed, and they never took his license away. And I was elected president of the State Bar of Wisconsin, so, she missed out. She had the stresses of my brother being convicted of an offense because the IRS were getting their ass kicked by him in the courtroom. He was a former intelligence agent and a prosecuting attorney for the Criminal Tax Division of the Department of Justice, and he ran the grand jury on skimming in Las Vegas. So our families had some interesting adventures.
Wow.
Who's the best trial lawyer you ever saw?
Other than yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I'm the best trial lawyer. Jerry Boyle was a spectacular lawyer in Milwaukee for juries, and he passed away just 3 weeks ago. And he was in the office with me for a couple of years after he had run for district attorney. He had been the deputy against Mike McCann, and he lost there, so he went into private practice. But at that time, Jerry just had a spectacular way with people, but he was great in the courtroom. Bill Coffey was an exceptional local lawyer in the courtroom as well, and he and I worked together in the U.S. Attorney's Office during a period of time. John Murray, who was a Milwaukee lawyer who ended his career in the Habish firm, but he was with Bill Coffey and Bob Lerner. He was great in the courtroom. He had a great, a young man's personality, and he was an Irish farfler, and he just was good. Those are some of them that come to mind as being lawyers who could get up with any kind of a situation and talk. Mike Guerin, who was one of my partners who passed away, who was a former cop. If we had cases that we had Ray DeLosto, who was a great trial lawyer, and Tom Brown was a great trial lawyer, and he was a federal prosecutor, and he was against me when he was in the U.S. Attorney's Office a couple of cases, too. In fact, he was on the other side of me in a Sally case. They were great in the courtroom, but we had an impossible case. We give it to Mike Guerin, and he walk around like Columbo. Do you remember the show Columbo?
Oh, yeah.
One more question.
Okay. And he was like Columbo, and he win cases nobody else could win because the jury felt sorry for him. But it was all intentional.
That might be my new technique.
I saw one of the biggest pull a rabbit out of a hat cases ever where the jury felt sympathetic toward the lawyer because he was so bad, and it wasn't intentional, but they won the case. I was like, okay.
And I did, I have to say this, I did conscientiously dumbed down.
Yeah.
In cases when I was U.S. attorney, when I had just a butcher lawyer on the other side, because I think jurors do feel that a lawyer that doesn't have the ability to sustain the level of representation that jurors hope all parties have in a case, feel sorry for that person, and they kind of reward inappropriately the defendant who's ill represented.
They take up the mantle of the guy who's underrepresented.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why should he be penalized because he's got a bad lawyer?
Yeah.
So I know we have a little bit of time, but a little bit of a time crunch. But I do have a question because I always, when I hear you talk about walking the streets of Milwaukee in the early 40s and that sort of thing, what would you say is the biggest difference in I mean, obviously the world is a different place than it was in the 1940s and 50s, but Milwaukee, what would you say from a personality perspective? Is it the same town, or is it a completely different place than it was 70 years ago?
Well, it's not between now and you say 7 years ago, was it?
70, I mean.
70 years ago, Milwaukee was, for all intents and purposes, a city of pockets. What do I mean by that? If you went to Mitchell Street and south of Mitchell Street, you had a certain ethnicity of population, and they had common denominators. They all were Catholics. Many of them were Polish. If you went to another part, the near East Side, they were Italians, all Catholic. They went to the same churches. They went to the same parochial schools. If you went to the heart of the hood, you had a black minority group. If you went just north of there and into the east side, you had two different groups of Jews. You had the Russian Jews, which is where my family comes from. They came over here with nothing but hopes and expectations. You had the German Jews who came over here with educations, and they had property, and they lived on the east side, and they lived in the east side of Milwaukee and Whitefish Bay and in Fox Point and Shorewood, and they had Reformed synagogues. And then on the near west side, there were the Orthodox synagogues where the Russian Jews went to. Well, you don't have those lines of demarcation anymore between people. By and large, you don't. I mean, there may be an unconscious awareness of 2 generations ago, but not a conscious awareness of that, or 3 generations ago, because I'm the second generation of American born in my family. And so I'm the 3rd generation to my kids, okay? And that's true of these other groups. But today you have much more diversity, if you will, in the streets in terms of neighborhoods and what have you. Not to say that the Spanish-speaking people who are here from Mexico or Central America don't live on the near south side. They do. The African Americans live on the near north side. They continue to. But many of them have had the opportunity, by reason of their commercial successes, to move into the suburbs and to be integrated in the commerce of life of other people. That wasn't true when I was a kid growing up. You were blue collar, you were gray collar or white collar, and there wasn't a lot of interaction between those groups. But there was bigotry, and a bigotry that was spawned overtly in World War II against Jews, for example. I experienced that as a young person growing up, and just give you an example. There was a Jewish country club called Brynwood, and it's now the Wisconsin Country Club. But there were Jews who were the major producers of business in law firms like Foley and Lardner and Quarles and Brady that couldn't get into Milwaukee Country Club because they were a Jew. So there was overt prejudice that doesn't exist. Prejudice exists. Overtness doesn't exist. So today a Jew can get into Milwaukee Country Club. I mean, that doesn't mean you can walk in there and say, here's a check, and like that movie with what's his name?
Eddie Murphy?
Well, it wasn't Eddie Murphy. I'm thinking of the other guy.
Oh, Rodney Dangerfield or something.
It wasn't even. It was him, his character, kind of a thing. So,
would you think that's a dynamic though that was a Milwaukee dynamic, or was that just cities all over the United States in the 1940s?
I can't speak from other cities.
Yeah.
But I think that there is a global dynamic quality that exists particularly in places which would be destination residences from out of the country places. Mm-hmm. So while you still have a lot of folks coming in from Spanish-speaking countries, they're not going to come to Milwaukee first blush.
Right.
They're going to go to Southwest, okay? Or they're going to go up to New York because if you go to New York and walk the streets, I was there not too long ago, and one of the things that I enjoy about New York is walking the streets and just having the sense of the diversification of the people on the street. I mean,
yeah, it's incredible.
You can be on one block and you can probably come up with a handful of people that are speaking 4 different languages.
Mm-hmm, sure.
In that one block. And they're different looking, and they're crowded together. And you'll find people there that make $2 million a year walking down the same block that somebody who's making $35,000 a year walk on. But the guy who makes $35,000 a year, he's not going to live like the person who makes $1 million a year or more.
Yeah. What about, though, I moved to Milwaukee in the year 2000. And I always say that it feels, but my grandparents are from Milwaukee, and it felt like, without being a Milwaukee historian, that the 50s and 60s were really kind of a heyday in Milwaukee. Maybe it had a little bit of a struggle in the 70s and 80s. But since I've been here in the year 2000, it feels like it's all been sort of an incline. Are you bullish or bearish on Milwaukee and how you've seen it ebb and flow over the years?
I am bullish on Milwaukee from the point of view that I think that a person can move from one economic social strata to another here within a lifetime. I really believe that. I don't think that was true in the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
Nonetheless, that doesn't mean that there aren't forces at play that give me a chill, that buy into the notion that we need to wean ourselves of people because of one or another ethnic characterization or characteristic. It's education, and it's the passage of generations.
Well, we know you got to run. Thank you so much. This has
been we probably didn't get down the road to some of the interesting cases that I had.
We could have a 5-hour podcast with you. Maybe we'll have you back if you're willing, and we'll do
parts 2 and
Frank
3.
Gimbel story 2, 3, 4, and 5. But in the meantime, keep us and everybody listening posted on the book.
The book is it does not have the in-depth analytical discussion of the Balistreri case, for example, that I gave you. And that's because I am of the view that we live in a time when recreational reading, at least in my eyes and in my experience, you want stories that are a beginning, a middle, and an end quickly.
Mm-hmm. Punchy, quick.
We're educated to the point where we have an appetite for journalistic kind of novels, not War and Peace. 1,000-page explanations.
Is your book fully formed? Is it just a matter of editing, or is it still?
My book is, as I say, it's 90% complete.
It is, okay.
I'm going through now with my author, and we are, kind of doing some editing, but it's not edited in the form that I could take it to a printer and put it on the street. Mm-hmm. And someone with some skills in doing that kind of stuff will have to look at it again. But there are some very interesting stories in the book. If you're interested in, for example, some of the dynamics of politics in the city of Milwaukee.
So is the book mostly law war stories, or is it politics? Is it just life interest
All
stuff?
of
A little bit of
all the above.
All the above. That's
So
good.
I've got some of the politics. I've got some of the civic stuff, building the convention center, and then it's got some of the very colorful cases,
Well, maybe
I tried cases around the country. I tried a jury trial in Miami. My client was indicted in multiple counts of defrauding the government in the construction of Cape Canaveral. And I was very concerned about who was going to be on my jury. And I thought, I don't sell well in the South. And we had 40 people that were available first blush to pick for a jury. I think there were 3 people who were born in the South. Now I tried a case in North Carolina, Wilmington, North Carolina. I had to hire a lawyer to interpret dialect.
Wow.
So I'm saying, sir, what do you do for a living? So what did he say? He said he works in the battery factory in Fayetteville.
Wow.
And I got up in front of the jury. My opening statement, there was 4 or 5 defendants, 4 or 5 lawyers. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You have no idea where Milwaukee, Wisconsin is or what it is. But one thing I do know is everybody down here thinks everybody up north is crooked, dishonest, don't work hard. You don't have good opinions about us that live up north. But let me tell you, I'm not from New Jersey. I'm not from New York. I'm from Wisconsin. We're really nice people up there. And I want you not to judge my client because I have a different accent than you have, that I'm from a different part of the country. I'm going to show you a letter. Beyond object, Mr. Gamble's arguing in the jury. You come on up here now, Mr. Gamble. You here? So I walk up to the bench. He's got the glasses. He puts it down on his nose. Mr. Gamble, we don't allow no arguing in front of the jury in opening statement. Your Honor, with all due respect, I says, I've tried over 100 jury cases. Nobody in the country allows arguing in opening statement. I am not arguing to the jury. I'm explaining to the jury what I'm going to show them and the proof. Well, let me see that letter you got in your hand right there. Okay, I give it to him. You got that, and now the courtroom is full of people. Yeah. This is at sidebar, okay? He looks and says, well, you got to know something, Jimmy? I remember Mr. Gamble right. Your objection is overruled. He's not arguing. Sure. That was the only ruling I got. In fact,
my cousin Vinny.
Yeah, it was my cousin Vinny. And in fact, I'm trying to remember, there was a Michael Best lawyer that was there. He died. I'm just drawing a blank on his name.
Andy Gutierrez?
It wasn't Andy, no. Younger than Andy. He lived on the east side. He was related to Rudy Randa, or his wife was related to Rudy Randa, too. And he was there for the whole trial.
Paul Lynn?
Paul Lynn, yeah.
Why was he there?
He was there because it was a case of Harnischweger. I represented an employee of Harnischweger. So he was Harnischweger's
the favorite son of Wilmington, Delaware, or Wilmington, North Carolina is?
What?
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, that's right. He's from that neighborhood, isn't he?
Yep.
Well, I knew when we drove up to our hotel. It was across the street from the Federal Building, and I got my client in the car with me, and the marquee said, "Welcome to the Daughters of the Confederacy," and I said, "We're fucked." And that's on the Cape Fear River.
Oh,
so
yeah.
They've got that. Have you ever been there?
No, but
you've seen there's a movie.
It was redone with Robert De Niro.
That's right. Yeah. And they got that gun goes off on them, and that did while we're trying to case it.
Wow. Well, let's do this.
That's a good.
You publish your book.
Yeah.
And then we'll read it.
Okay.
And then we'll have you back on.
Well, if I'm still alive,
and then we'll sell a million copies.
But just
of your
for
book.
this, I'm going to just go a quick footnote to that story is that everybody got convicted in the case in North Carolina. And I heard that the judge just retired, at like age 120 or something like that. And so the first guy, the main defendant, he gets 5 years in prison. His wife, who's got a 2-year-old kid at home, she gets 3 years in prison. The next guy who's in a wheelchair from Buffalo, they asked for 18 months. He gets 18 months. My guy, they want 18 months. And the judge gives him 6 months, 2 months house detention. And he calls me into chambers. Mr. Gamble, he says, I just want to tell you, you're a real fine lawyer. I really enjoyed having you in my courtroom. I said, well, thank you, Judge. He says, I'd like you to come back here anytime, I said to myself. If someone walks into my office tomorrow with a shopping bag with $1 million in cash. I had that once happen, by the way. Shopping bag with $1 million.
I'm not going back to Wilmington.
I ain't going there. And I had my hand behind my back. I thought there was, I crossed my fingers. It would be my joy to come back here too. And I was thinking to myself, I would have to be fucking crazy. And we went to the Fifth Circuit, and on that case, I mean, my guy did his time, but it was a couple months. That's all I got.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, you never know. Anyhow, you could tell stories the same way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Frank.
much.
It's been really nice
Excellent.
spending time.